case of Angie Houseman. Angie Houseman was born on February 18, 1984, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father left before she was born, so she never had the chance to know him. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother remarried a man named Ronald, with whom she later had a son. Angie had a good relationship with her stepfather and shared a close bond with her younger brother. She was a warm, sociable child who made friends easily. Angie grew up with her family in a peaceful suburban neighborhood in St. Louis. In 1993, when Angie was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at a local elementary school located just over a mile from her home. She traveled to school by bus, boarding at a nearby stop, and her parents felt comfortable letting her go on her own because of how close it was. Angie typically walked to and from the bus stop with other children from the neighborhood. Several parents kept watch from their windows, making sure the children arrived home safely. It was a long-standing neighborhood custom for residents to look out for one another's children and ensure their safe return from the bus stop. On November 18th, Angie followed her normal routine and went to school, finishing the day at 3 p.m. She boarded the school bus with several neighborhood children and got off at her usual stop. Because the other kids lived closer to the stop, they continued ahead, leaving Angie to walk the short remaining distance home by herself. When Angie did not arrive home, something that was highly unusual, her parents became concerned about half an hour later. They decided to retrace Angie's regular route from the house to the bus stop in hopes of finding her. Along the way, they spoke with other students from her school, who confirmed that Angie had gotten off the bus with them and was heading toward her home. They also questioned neighbors who typically watched over the children, but those neighbors had been occupied that day and had not noticed anything out of the ordinary. Despite searching the area with the help of friends, Angie's parents were unable to locate her. As night fell, Angie's parents contacted the police for help. Officers quickly began searching for her. Given the cold weather, it seemed unlikely that Angie had simply wandered off, leading investigators to suspect that something more serious may have occurred. Their concern was intensified by a recent kidnapping attempt in the neighborhood involving an 11-year-old girl just 10 days earlier. In that incident, a man had approached the girl as she stepped off her school bus and attempted to pull her into nearby bushes, but she managed to escape. Since the suspect had not yet been caught, police considered the possibility that he could be connected to Angie's disappearance. Police brought in trained scent tracking dogs, which picked up Angie's trail near the bus stop. The dogs followed the scent for roughly halfway to her home before losing it. This led investigators to believe that Angie may have entered a vehicle at that point, raising serious concerns that she had been abducted. Authorities also deployed helicopters equipped with specialized sensors to search the area and check the banks of a nearby stream close to Angie's home. Despite these efforts, neither Angie nor any of her belongings were found. The initial day of searching for Angie produced no results, leading police to seek help from the media. News of her disappearance quickly spread across the city, resulting in more than 300 calls to the police department within the first 24 hours. To manage the influx of tips, over 20 additional officers were assigned to the case. Despite the extensive response, none of the leads resulted in finding Angie. Detectives examined every possible angle, and early in the investigation, Angie's stepfather came under scrutiny. He denied any involvement in her disappearance, insisting that he would never harm her. In an effort to clear his name, he agreed to undergo a polygraph test and other evaluations, urging investigators to concentrate on finding Angie rather than focusing on him. The investigation also uncovered Angie's biological father, who had never had direct contact with his daughter. However, Angie's mother reported that he had been seen driving past their home on several occasions, watching Angie play outside. While this behavior raised concerns among detectives, the man was able to provide a solid alibi that was verified. On the third day after Angie went missing, the FBI joined the local police in the investigation, prompting even more officers to be assigned to the case. By that point, it had become clear to everyone involved that something terrible had likely happened to Angie, as the freezing temperatures made it improbable that she could have survived on her own. A new lead soon emerged when a witness reported seeing a suspicious man slowly driving a blue sedan through Angie's neighborhood. The description closely matched that provided by a young girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction attempt just 10 days before Angie disappeared. Police produced a composite sketch of the suspect and released it to the media. Thousands of flyers featuring the sketch were distributed by volunteers, but despite the widespread exposure, the man's identity remained unknown. As the case gained national attention, it was covered on television, attracting even more leads. The police carefully examined each new lead, but none of them led to Angie's discovery. The case also drew in psychics. They began calling Angie's home to share their alleged visions. One psychic claimed that Angie was alive and even provided a specific location where she was being held, a large national park 25 miles from her home. However, the detectives did not give any credence to these claims. A reward of $10,000 was offered to anyone who could provide information about Angie's disappearance, which led to a large number of tips being submitted. During the investigation, detectives discovered a concerning detail. Angie had told her teacher a few days before she vanished that she planned to go on a nature trip with her uncle. However, Angie's parents were unaware of any uncle, and it seemed Angie had fabricated this story. This led investigators to consider the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor beforehand and referred to them as her uncle. Unfortunately, the conversation with her teacher did not provide any information about this mysterious individual. The investigation stalled, with no progress made in the following days. On November 27th, 9 days after Angie's disappearance, an important development in the case occurred. A hunter contacted the police, reporting that he had found a body in the woods of a national park. Upon arriving at the scene, police were met with a disturbing sight. A young girl's body was tied to a tree, naked, with her head completely wrapped in tape except for her nose. Her hands were also bound with handcuffs. Near where the body was found, they found a bag containing personal items, which were quickly identified as Angie's. Among the belongings were notebooks with her name. After being transferred to the medical examiner, a detailed examination of the body revealed additional shocking facts. The removal of tape from her head uncovered a piece of underwear lodged in her mouth. The autopsy results indicated that Angie's death had occurred only a few hours before the body was discovered. This suggested she was held captive for 9 days, only to be left to freeze to death at the scene. Experts further determined that Angie suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted during her ordeal. Forensic analysts carefully inspected every piece of evidence collected from the crime scene and identified a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They cross-referenced this evidence against potential suspects in their database, but unfortunately, this led to no new leads. The discovery of the body accelerated the police investigation, prompting the allocation of additional resources to help solve the case. The community was shocked by the extreme brutality of the crime and was deeply concerned for their children's safety, with many escorting their kids to bus stops and keeping a close watch over them at all times. A few days after Angie's discovery, concerns escalated further. On December 1st, a 10-year-old named Cassidy went missing from a nearby town, just 10 miles from Angie's home. Cassidy asked her mother for permission to visit friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but then she disappeared. Cassidy's disappearance sparked an extensive police investigation, and detectives began to suspect the possibility that Cassidy's case might be linked to a serial killer. Although they considered the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, they lacked concrete evidence to support this theory. 10 days later, Cassidy's body was found in St. Louis, wrapped in bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain. The cause of death was severe head injuries. Despite efforts, detectives couldn't find any leads to the killer. Furthermore, they started questioning whether the same person was responsible for both Angie's and Cassidy's deaths. Detectives suspected they might be dealing with two different killers due to the distinct characteristics of the crimes. Around the same time, they identified a 37-year-old man named Gary as a potential suspect. Gary had previously attempted to abduct a girl just before Angie went missing and regularly traveled to St. Louis for work. The man was initially investigated for potential involvement in the murders of Angie and Cassidy, but he had an alibi for the time of their disappearances. Although he was not connected to these crimes, he did admit to assaulting 4 other girls and was subsequently sentenced to 5 years in prison. In February of the following year, a significant development in the case was revealed when detectives finally found Cassidy's body. Nearby, they found tire tracks that were identified as coming from a pickup truck model frequently used by a prominent car rental company. The distinctive vehicles were easily recognizable due to their vibrant brand logos. With this new information, detectives interviewed residents in Cassidy's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen one of these pickup trucks. One woman reported seeing a vehicle from the car rental company near her neighbor's house about a week after Cassidy's disappearance. Police found a woman who lived with her husband and brother at the house they were investigating. When questioned, the woman claimed neither she nor her husband or brother had rented the pickup associated with the crime, and they had no involvement in the case. However, detectives were skeptical of her claims and obtained a search warrant for the house. Upon searching the house, investigators found blood traces from the victim, Cassidy, in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, was the one who had rented the pickup in question. Initially, Thomas denied any involvement but eventually confessed when confronted with the evidence. According to Thomas's confession, Cassidy had come to his door, wanting to invite his nephews out to play. He invited her into the house and led her to the basement, where he attempted to assault her. When Cassidy screamed, Thomas struck her with a heavy object and then covered her body with bed sheets. After committing the crime, Thomas went to work as usual. Upon returning home, his sister told him that she had discovered the body in the basement. She made it clear that she didn't want to know the details of what happened and insisted that the body be disposed of immediately. Cassidy's body remained in the basement for a week due to ongoing searches, and Thomas was too afraid to move it. Once things had calmed down, he rented a pickup truck and took the body to St. Louis, where he hid her body. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death for his crimes but died in prison several years later due to illness. Despite being questioned about Angie's case, he maintained his innocence, leading detectives to conclude that the crimes were unrelated. The investigation stalled for many months with few leads coming in. Years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge when the reward for information was set to expire, sparking concerns that the public would stop providing tips and assistance in the case. However, in 2001, a local businessman donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This large sum of money caused a spike in information to the police. But unfortunately, there were no clues to help solve the case. In 2001, a new development emerged in the Angie Houseman case when Corey Fox, an inmate, turned himself in and confessed to multiple murders, including the murder of Angie Houseman. Corey Fox provided detailed information about Angie's abduction and captivity, including being tied to a tree with her underwear used as a gag. However, upon further questioning, detectives found inconsistencies in his confession, such as incorrectly stating that Angie's hands were restrained with plastic handcuffs instead of iron ones. Further investigation revealed that Corey Fox also fabricated parts of his confession, possibly due to extensive media coverage of Angie's case. Another tragic case happened in 2002. The abduction and murder of a 6-year-old girl briefly sparked renewed interest in Angie's case. However, it was soon determined that the two cases were unrelated. The perpetrator in the 2002 case was a neighbor. He quickly confessed during interrogation, while Angie's case remained unsolved. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives reopened the case in 2007. They re-examined the documents and found a peculiar detail. A man named Roger Martin was in a parked car near the crime scene when Angie's body was discovered. When questioned, Roger claimed he was in the area for hunting, but a search of his car found no hunting gear. Further investigation revealed that Roger had a criminal record involving children, including an assault near the location where Angie's body was found. These crimes occurred before Angie's death, but the police had not thoroughly investigated Roger at the time. The new detective team called Roger in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, claiming he was in the area by chance. Roger stated that he was still at work when Angie's body was left at the crime scene. The investigation stalled after a 9-hour interrogation of Roger failed to yield results. Although his fingerprints were taken and compared to those on the tape from Angie's head, no match was found, leading to his release due to insufficient evidence. The case remained stagnant until 2018 when the St. Louis Police Department established a dedicated task force to re-examine the evidence using advanced technology. The team focused on three crucial pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, the tape from Angie's head, and the underwear used to silence her. Despite previous failed attempts to find the perpetrator's DNA on these items, the detectives were determined to try again. They began by re-examining the handcuffs but encountered difficulties due to the presence of Angie's blood. They then turned their attention to the tape from Angie's head, but discovered it had deteriorated over time, rendering their efforts meaningless. The investigators examined the underwear as a last resort, despite low expectations due to it being in Angie's mouth for several hours, which could have erased any foreign DNA. Using advanced technology, they thoroughly inspected every inch of the underwear and eventually found a tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA, sufficient for analysis. The DNA was confirmed to belong to a male and was immediately uploaded to the FBI database. In cases like this, it's common for the DNA not to match anyone in the database, requiring further efforts to identify the person. However, in this instance, the detectives got lucky. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a match. The DNA belonged to a 58-year-old named Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox was not on police radar in connection with Angie's case, but he had a significant criminal record. His first stint in prison was in 1982, during his military service in Germany, where he worked as a part-time babysitter. However, his babysitting job ended when 4 girls accused him of sexual assault. Cox initially received an 8-year prison sentence in the United States but was released after serving only 3 years. Following his release, he relocated to St. Louis. However, his freedom was short-lived as he was arrested again 4 years later when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Although the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, he violated his parole, resulting in an additional year in prison. After his release in 1992, he moved to St. Louis to live with his relatives. The following year, he allegedly abducted and murdered Angie. In 2002, Cox was arrested again, this time for operating a major online platform where users shared child abuse materials. The FBI had been investigating the platform and caught Cox in a sting operation when he attempted to meet an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl. Cox had planned to make the girl his slave and had sent her money for a bus ticket. However, when he arrived at the meeting place, he was met by armed FBI agents and arrested. A search of his computer revealed over 45,000 images of child abuse, as well as evidence that he was the mastermind behind the online platform. This led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the largest operations against pedophiles in the country. In 2003, Cox was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, when his term ended, a judge used a legal loophole to keep him detained, citing him as a serious threat to children. He remained in prison until 2019, when his DNA sample matched the DNA sample from Angie's case. Detectives visited Cox in prison to discuss the match, but he denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. Given the strong DNA evidence against him, the police knew Cox's chances of winning in court were slim. Instead of pursuing a trial, investigators contacted Cox's lawyer with a proposal. In exchange for Cox's confession to Angie's murder, the prosecution would drop the death penalty and seek a life sentence instead. Aware of the strong evidence against him, Cox agreed to the deal. Detectives returned to the prison to hear Cox's account of the events. Although some parts of his story seemed unlikely, the crucial aspect for investigators was his admission to the murder. Cox claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving near his mother's and sister's neighborhood when his car broke down in the middle of the road. When he tried to examine the car, a school bus stopped and several children got off. The children went into their homes except for one girl, Angie. According to Cox, Angie approached him and they briefly talked. He noticed she was cold, so he offered her a ride in his car, which she allegedly accepted. Cox then took Angie to Burger King to eat and later brought her to his home, where he claimed to have sexually assaulted her over several days. Eventually, Cox decided to get rid of Angie, taking her to the location where her body would later be found. He tied her to a tree, claiming she was still alive at that moment. Detectives were skeptical about certain parts of Cox's story. Angie was unlikely to get into a car with a stranger, given the short distance to her home. The investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Cox's story. He claimed the car stalled, but it started again when Angie approached. It's more likely that the perpetrator targeted Angie and decided to abduct her. This hypothesis seems more plausible than Cox's account. The detectives got what they needed: a confession to the murder. In August 2020, Cox was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Unfortunately, Angie's mother didn't live to see justice served. She died of cancer in 2016. Angie's stepfather, Ronald, told reporters that Cox was responsible for his wife's death and should have been tried for 2 murders. A woman's life was forever changed after the loss of her daughter. She lost all interest in life and eventually passed away. Cox's story, however, took a different turn. The prosecutor reopened a case involving the sexual abuse of 2 7-year-old girls, for which Cox had previously received a lenient sentence of 1 year in prison for violating his parole. The police reached out to one of Cox's victims, now an adult, and asked her to testify against him. Cox ultimately admitted to his crimes and was given an additional 10-year prison sentence. In court, his victim spoke out, saying that despite Cox's terrible actions, she would go on to live a happy and fulfilling life, while Cox would spend the rest of his life in prison. When police arrived at Michael Polding's apartment in Brighton, they noticed piles of unopened mail and an eerie silence. No one answered the door. Something felt off. When officers forced their way inside, they found a horrifying scene. In the basement, wrapped in sheets and left to rot, was Michael's body. He had been missing for nearly 2 months, and now the truth was finally coming to light. But how did he end up there? And where was Ricardo Pisano, the man who had been living with him? As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing story of trust, lies, and betrayal. Michael had opened his home and heart to someone he believed cared for him. Instead, he had been used, manipulated, and ultimately left to die. But what really happened in that apartment? And how did Ricardo manage to escape justice for so long? Ricardo Pisano was born in South Africa in 1977. His early life, much like his true identity, remains shrouded in mystery. Most of what is known about his past comes from his own interviews, but their accuracy is often questioned. While he insisted that Ricardo was not his real name, we will refer to him as such for clarity. Raised in a household that, like many in South Africa, struggled with poverty, Ricardo faced hardships from an early age. As he grew older, these challenges only intensified. In his teenage years, he met a young woman with whom he had a daughter. The responsibility of fatherhood pushed him to seek ways to provide for his new family. Accounts of his work history are vague, but there are strong indications that Ricardo became involved with drug trafficking gangs that controlled the streets of Cape Town. According to later statements, he claimed to have been threatened by a group known as Pagada, which emerged at the time as a vigilante movement aiming to combat crime through street justice. While some saw this organization as a force for good, law enforcement viewed it as a radical entity that took justice into its own hands. Feeling endangered by this group, Ricardo, then 23 years old, fled South Africa, leaving behind his wife and daughter. From that point on, his life became a series of struggles and deceptions, characterized by the use of false identities to evade the authorities. His journey led him to New Zealand, where he was soon arrested for extortion. Sentenced to 15 months in prison, he managed to escape after serving only 8 months by taking advantage of a prison event in 2001. Despite an intensive manhunt, he vanished without a trace. Resourceful and elusive, Ricardo made his way to Australia, where he lived under a different identity for about a year and a half before moving illegally to the United Kingdom in 2004. Once in the UK, with no legal status and no financial resources, he was forced to find ways to survive while staying under the radar. It was during this time that he crossed paths with 2 individuals who made a living through sex work. Seeing it as an easy way to make money, Ricardo joined them. Initially, he catered to female clients, but he soon realized that male clients were more willing to pay for discretion. One of these clients was Michael Polding, a 59-year-old man whom Ricardo met in December 2009 after Michael responded to an ad Ricardo had placed in a gay magazine offering escort services. Michael was born in Scotland in 1950 into a large and wealthy family, being one of 9 siblings. Though his childhood was a happy one, his teenage years became more difficult as he came to terms with his attraction to men, something his family and the conservative society around him did not accept. Seeking a life of greater freedom, Michael moved to London at the age of 20, settling in Croydon, South London, where he secured a stable job in the urology department of a hospital. His career provided him with financial security, and despite the distance, he maintained strong ties with his family in Scotland, who described him as kind and loving. As the years passed, Michael found happiness with his partner, Henry, with whom he shared his life until Henry's passing in 2001. This loss devastated him, leading to a deep depression. He turned to alcohol to cope, and as his health declined, exacerbated by osteoporosis, his relationships became fleeting. Nearing 60, loneliness weighed heavily on him, prompting him to seek the company of younger men. This search led him to Ricardo, in whom he hoped to find companionship. What began as a straightforward exchange, money for companionship, soon developed into something deeper, at least for Michael. Ricardo quickly realized Michael's loneliness and generosity, and saw an opportunity to take advantage of it. Within months of meeting, Ricardo had moved into Michael's apartment. To explain his presence, he told different stories. Some believed he was Michael's caretaker due to health issues, while others were told he was his godson. In October 2011, after losing his job, Michael decided to relocate to Brighton, specifically to the Kemptown area, known for its vibrant LGBTQ community. He hoped that moving there would allow him to live more openly as a gay man. Using some of the proceeds from the sale of his former apartment, he paid a full year's rent upfront for his new home, where Ricardo also moved in with him. The remainder of his savings, he entrusted to his sister Mary for safekeeping. Aware of this financial cushion, Ricardo and his associates persuaded Michael to invest his savings in a beauty salon, a decision that would later have dire consequences. In an effort to oversee the supposed beauty salon business, one of Ricardo's associates temporarily moved into the apartment that Ricardo and Michael shared. However, from the very beginning, the venture was doomed to fail. By May 2012, Ricardo convinced Michael that they needed additional funds to keep the business afloat. Trusting him, Michael reached out to his sister and transferred several sums. First $600, then another $120, and finally, a larger sum of $1,900. After this last transaction, all communication between Michael and his family abruptly ceased. Concern quickly spread among his loved ones. It was highly uncharacteristic of Michael to ignore calls and emails, raising alarms. As weeks passed with no word from him, his sister officially reported his disappearance to Sussex police on July 16, 2012. When officers arrived at Michael's residence, they immediately noticed stacks of unopened mail piling up at the entrance, a telltale sign that something was wrong. Upon forcing entry, they made a grim discovery. Michael's body was found wrapped in bedsheets in the basement, already in an advanced state of decomposition. The autopsy revealed multiple injuries, including broken ribs and a fractured collarbone, prompting police to launch a full-scale homicide investigation. As detectives questioned neighbors, they learned that Michael had moved into the area with 2 younger men. Witnesses reported that the relationship between the 3 often seemed tense, sometimes even violent. Authorities attempted to locate both individuals. Ricardo's associate was found and taken into custody as a suspect, but was later released on bail due to a lack of concrete evidence. Ricardo, however, had disappeared without a trace. A key testimony came from Ricardo's supposed business partner. He recounted that on May 22, 2012, he had visited the apartment and found Michael in a severely weakened state. When he suggested calling an ambulance, Ricardo refused. This statement led investigators to a critical discovery. Michael had been hospitalized just weeks earlier with head injuries and fractured ribs. Piecing together the evidence, authorities determined that Michael had likely died sometime between May 23rd and May 30th, 2012, nearly 2 months before his body was found. This timeline reinforced the theory that Ricardo was the last person to see Michael alive, making him a prime suspect and intensifying the urgency to locate him. As the investigation deepened, police uncovered disturbing details about Ricardo's past. Though he had been close to Michael, their relationship was marked by manipulation, control, and escalating violence. To build a case against him, detectives compiled a psychological and behavioral profile, highlighting his history of financial exploitation and the turbulent nature of his involvement with Michael. Given the seriousness of the case, Sussex police launched a major operation, Operation Diary, dedicating extensive resources to track him down. For over a year, Ricardo's face appeared across media outlets and crime watch programs. Authorities described him as approximately 35 years old, of slim build, with olive-toned skin. Reports suggested he was last seen in Brighton in mid-May and could have altered his appearance, possibly growing a beard or disguising himself. He was known for his South African accent and history of using false identities. As the case gained international attention, the search extended beyond the UK. Given his past ties to South Africa and New Zealand, multiple law enforcement agencies collaborated to locate him. Media outlets gave him various nicknames, while a South African newspaper dubbed him the cunning escapist. London tabloids branded him New Zealand's most wanted, as he was the only one of 55 fugitives in Waikato who had evaded capture in over a decade. To encourage public assistance, authorities offered a $6,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. Leads began trickling in. A crucial piece of evidence emerged from surveillance footage recorded in July 2012, showing Ricardo in a Southampton shopping center. This confirmed that he had not left the UK and was still actively evading authorities. Despite these clues, he remained elusive. The urgency to capture him intensified in April 2013, when forensic experts released the final autopsy results. The medical examiner ruled Michael's death a homicide, confirming that blunt force trauma to the chest was the cause. With this revelation, Ricardo was officially named the prime suspect, prompting law enforcement to ramp up their efforts. The manhunt finally ended on May 9, 2013, when Ricardo was located and arrested following an altercation at a residence in Southampton. Despite his attempts to conceal his identity, authorities confirmed his true background and took him into custody. Following his arrest, Ricardo was transferred to Brighton, where Sussex's major crime unit began their interrogations, determined to unravel the full story behind Michael's tragic death. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Ricardo maintained that he was not in the city at the time of the crime. In an emotional statement, Michael's family expressed both their anguish and relief. While knowing that the person believed to be responsible was behind bars provided some closure, they struggled to understand what had truly led to Michael's tragic end. Now, investigators turned their focus to uncovering the motive behind the crime. As detectives delved deeper, they confirmed that Ricardo and Michael's relationship had evolved into a toxic dynamic riddled with manipulation and abuse. From the start, Ricardo had relied entirely on Michael for financial support, claiming he had no job or income. Under the guise of being a caregiver, he gradually drained Michael's savings, taking advantage of his generosity. Along with 2 associates, Ricardo convinced Michael to invest nearly all his money into a business that failed almost immediately. With his bank account nearly empty, financial strain may have been the breaking point. Witnesses recalled seeing Michael in distress during the time frame in which his death was believed to have occurred. This discovery raised significant concerns. It suggested that Ricardo had intentionally denied Michael the care he needed, possibly sealing his fate. Further investigation uncovered a crucial contradiction in Ricardo's alibi. Phone records proved he had, in fact, been in Brighton at the time of Michael's death, despite his earlier claims. Additionally, police found messages he had sent shortly after Michael's body was discovered, in which he feigned concern over his absence. This appeared to be an attempt to establish an alibi and divert suspicion away from himself. With mounting evidence, Ricardo was officially charged with murder and grievous bodily harm. His trial began in September 2013. During the trial, prosecutors painted Ricardo as a master manipulator, a man who had built his life on deception, using false identities to evade justice. They argued that Michael, a vulnerable and trusting individual, had fallen victim to Ricardo's calculated schemes. The prosecution maintained that once Michael's financial resources were depleted, Ricardo saw no further use for him and callously ended his life, leaving his body to decay for weeks. The jury was also presented with evidence of Ricardo's actions after the crime. Following Michael's death, he had sent text messages in an apparent effort to create a false narrative, pretending to be concerned about his well-being. The prosecution asserted that this was a deliberate ploy to cover his tracks, motivated by his fear of being exposed, not just for the crime, but also due to his illegal immigration status. When it was Ricardo's turn to testify, he attempted to steer the focus elsewhere. He spoke at length about his past, detailing his reasons for fleeing South Africa and claiming that returning would put his life at risk. Though he reiterated that Ricardo was not his real name, he once again refused to disclose his true identity. Regarding Michael, Ricardo portrayed himself as a devoted companion who had shared an emotional bond with the older man. He claimed that Michael had been aware of his troubled past, even offering to marry him so that he could remain in the UK legally. He also insisted that Michael had financially supported him not out of manipulation, but out of genuine care, even providing money for him to send to his family abroad. When addressing the circumstances of Michael's death, Ricardo put forth an entirely different version of events. According to his testimony, on May 29, 2012, he had gone for a walk along the beach. Upon returning home, he claimed to have found Michael hanging from the staircase railing. In an emotional recounting, he described the moment as devastating, insisting that he had desperately tried to revive him, but found no pulse. He explained that he had covered Michael's body with a towel and later wrapped him in a blanket, but fearing the consequences of contacting the authorities due to his immigration status, he chose not to report the death. Ricardo admitted feeling guilty for not arranging a proper burial, but insisted that he had not caused Michael's death. Michael's family, however, rejected Ricardo's claims, stating that he had never exhibited any signs of suicidal thoughts or mental distress. The prosecution also dismantled Ricardo's version of events, citing forensic evidence that ruled out suicide. The autopsy report had confirmed that Michael died from blunt force trauma to the chest, not from asphyxiation. The jury deliberated on December 9, 2013, weighing Ricardo's role in the crime. After several hours of discussion, they reached a verdict. Ricardo Pisano, now 37 years old, was found not guilty of murder, but was convicted of manslaughter, grievous bodily harm, and preventing a lawful burial. 1 week later, on December 16, 2013, the court sentenced Ricardo to 18.5 years in prison. In his final remarks, the judge emphasized the disturbing nature of Ricardo's actions, describing Michael as a victim of sustained manipulation, financial exploitation, and ultimately, violence. He condemned Ricardo's callous treatment of the man who had supported him, stating that leaving Michael's body to decay only added to the cruelty of his crime. The lead prosecutor in the case fully supported the sentence, echoing the judge's condemnation of Ricardo's actions. He emphasized that what made the crime particularly heinous was not just the financial and emotional exploitation of Michael, but the utter disregard Ricardo showed for him in death, leaving his body to decay in his own home, abandoned and forgotten. For Michael's sister, Mary, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but it could never be enough to compensate for the horror of what had happened. She described Ricardo as a despicable and ruthless individual, incapable of remorse. Though relieved that he would spend years behind bars, she and her husband Sam felt a deep responsibility to speak out. They decided to share their experience publicly, hoping that their story might prevent others from falling into similar situations. Their message became a call to action, urging those in abusive relationships to seek help before it was too late. Mary stressed that no one should suffer in silence and encouraged people to reach out to their loved ones for support. She firmly believed that open conversations about abuse, no matter the age, gender, or circumstances of the victim, were crucial for both protection and healing. If their testimony could help even one person escape a dangerous situation, she said, then sharing their pain would have been worth it. This case shed light on the complexities of relationships where power imbalances and emotional dependence can create a dangerous dynamic. While Michael and Ricardo's relationship may have initially appeared consensual, the evidence showed how Ricardo systematically manipulated him, taking advantage of his loneliness and financial security. Michael's murder was an extreme but tragically predictable outcome of unchecked abuse, where greed and control ultimately led to a devastating loss of life. The investigation also confirmed that Michael had endured prior physical mistreatment, red flags that, in hindsight, should have been recognized and acted upon. His death underscored the urgent need for greater awareness and intervention in situations where vulnerable individuals, particularly the elderly, are at risk of exploitation. Losing his long-term partner and struggling with health issues had left Michael increasingly isolated, making him an easy target for someone like Ricardo, an opportunist with no regard for the well-being of others. Only through awareness, education, and proactive measures can similar tragedies be prevented. Michael's family hopes that by sharing his story, they can help spark conversations and inspire real change, ensuring that no one else falls victim to the same kind of betrayal and cruelty. The case of Victoria Nazarova. Olga Tsbyk, a 35-year-old Ukrainian immigrant eyelash artist, reported a robbery at her home. The incident occurred on September 2, 2016. Olga Tsbyk called the police after discovering that several valuables had been stolen from her bedroom. When the police arrived at the scene, Olga Tsbyk explained that she had gone to the hospital earlier due to severe dizziness and nausea. To investigate the circumstances surrounding the incident, the police conducted a detailed interview with Olga Tsbyk. During the interview, she recalled a recent unpleasant encounter with a client named Victoria Narova, who had come to her home to request urgent eyelash extensions. When Victoria came to Olga Tsbyk's home to request urgent eyelash extensions, Olga Tsbyk told Victoria that she only did eyelash extensions in the salon and did not take clients at home. However, explaining to Victoria was useless and Olga Tsbyk had to agree to take her in. During the investigation, it was discovered that Victoria had come to Olga Tsbyk's apartment bringing 3 slices of cheesecake from a famous local bakery. Victoria enjoyed 2 slices and insisted that Olga Tsbyk eat the 3rd slice. After drinking tea and eating the cheesecake, Olga Tsbyk began to feel unwell. After Victoria left, Olga Tsbyk suffered from severe nausea, eventually passing out for about 30 minutes. After regaining consciousness, Olga Tsbyk called an ambulance and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. However, medical tests found nothing unusual in her blood. When Olga Tsbyk returned home, she discovered that several valuables were missing and reported the theft to the police. The police found Olga Tsbyk listless and looking unwell. The police suspected that Olga Tsbyk was under the influence of drugs and had made up the story. Despite the police's suspicions, Olga Tsbyk maintained that she had not taken any medication, and Olga Tsbyk believed that the cheesecake she had eaten was the cause of her condition, possibly poisoning. When searching the scene, police discovered a box of cookies from a local store in the trash, which Olga Tsbyk identified as the packaging for the cheesecake Victoria had brought. Police collected the remaining baking residue from the cheesecake, which was taken for in-room analysis to determine whether the cheesecake was the cause of Olga Tsbyk's health problems. But the forensic examination revealed nothing suspicious. Despite this, Olga Tsbyk insisted that the cheesecake was the cause of her condition. Olga Tsbyk mentioned that she had been to the hospital and that doctors had examined her body when she was admitted, and the police had contacted the medical facility to ask about Olga Tsbyk's condition and the test results. However, the doctors refused to provide information, citing patient confidentiality. The police considered this a reason not to believe Olga Tsbyk. The customer that Olga Tsbyk had told them about could not be found, so the case was adjourned. These details were told by a neighbor who the very next day noticed a suspicious woman at Olga's apartment. This woman came and went several times, hanging around the beauty master's apartment until she came face to face with her neighbor. The strange woman said that her friend Olga was sick and hurriedly left the house. The neighbors saw that the door to Olga's apartment was open and looked in to check on her. It was unbearably stuffy in the victim's apartment. The heating was on full blast despite the 30-degree summer heat. Olga was alive, but she was unconscious. She was lying on her bed, but she was wearing an unusual combination of clothes, revealing underwear and warm sports pants. When the detectives heard about this, they had the feeling that someone was deliberately trying to change the victim's clothes. Scattered around Olga were pills containing a powerful drug. It looked as if Olga had taken the pills with the intention of taking her own life. A neighbor immediately notified 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive-looking, and very similar to Olga. After learning new details, investigators became convinced that the doppelganger woman was not a figment of Olga's imagination. Then the detectives took up the case more actively. Everything they saw in the apartment seemed to be a description of a crime scene they wanted to frame as a voluntary demise. Detectives believed that the persistent cheesecake customer named Victoria Nerova was involved. The police began searching for Victoria, but they had no leads, no information about who she was or her photograph. Later, however, the department was approached by a private detective, a former police officer who had long been following the con artist's violent activities. He had already tracked Victoria online, where she advertised escort services on a dating site and through social media. The private investigator believed that the woman used online promotion to find victims for her crimes, and the scheme worked perfectly. Victoria would arrive at the home of the next client. Then she would drug the person with psychoactive substances so that they would lose consciousness. After that, she would take everything of value and then go into hiding. This activity could have been concealed indefinitely if not for this tragic circumstance. Meanwhile, Alsvik finally recovered from the unpleasant events. Then, having discharged from the hospital, she shared on her page in social networks the story of poisoning. After that, one of her clients unexpectedly told that she knew a man named Ruben Barakov who was in a similar story. Ruben was the owner of a dry cleaner, and the man met Victoria Nazarova on a Russian dating site about a couple of months before Olga's cheesecake poisoning. The new acquaintance invited Ruben to her home and boasted that she was a very good cook. He agreed and came to her place, but as soon as he tasted the dishes, the man lost consciousness. The friend emptied his pockets, took expensive watches, money, and cards. The man was under the influence of a very strong psychoactive substance and sincerely believes that it almost killed him. Later, when he began to regain consciousness, Victoria took him to the dry cleaners, gave him to his colleagues, and told them that he was drunk and then left. From there, only then did Ruben realize that he had been robbed. Private investigator assumed the situation was much more serious, and the two victims of the poisoner were very lucky. In 2017, he worked with a client from Russia to help track down an elusive criminal. Nadia Ford turned to the private detective after the disappearance of her own mother, Alla Alexenko. The girl herself lived in New York, USA, but was born in Russia. Nadia was originally from Kotor. Her mother, Alla Anko, single-handedly brought up her daughter and son, and she had a hard time. She worked 5 jobs to provide for her children. Nadia dreamed of living in the USA since childhood, and her dream came true when the girl came to study in America in 2007. There, she met a guy whom she married and took his surname, Ford. But the marriage did not work out, and the spouse is divorced. Nadia stayed to live in the United States and successfully settled there. She maintained close relations with her mother, who at that time was left alone. Years later, Alla Alexenko went missing in Russia, and Nadia hired a private investigator to find her mother, Alla Alexenko, in 2017. In an effort to find her, Nadia hired a private investigator who discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day her mother went missing. The investigator looked into the car's information and found surveillance footage from October 5, 2014. The footage showed the car driving on the highway with 2 people inside, the driver, Victoria, and a motionless woman in the front passenger seat who looked like the missing 54-year-old Alla Alexenko. Nadia believed that the woman in the footage was her mother. Nadia went to the police, who verified that Victoria had indeed rented the car. As a result, the police summoned Victoria for questioning. During an interview with Victoria, she revealed that she had indeed driven the rental car involved on October 5th, but said she was alone. Victoria agreed to take a lie detector test. Victoria was released pending the results, but later it turned out that Victoria failed a lie detector test and became the prime suspect in the case. Before the police could arrest her, Victoria took advantage of the opportunity, quickly fleeing the country on the first available flight. Meanwhile, the police expanded the search for the missing Alla Alexenko. Nadia actively participated in the investigation for 6 months, holding out hope that her mother was still alive. During the investigation, the police followed the route of the rented car, which led them to a forest near Victoria's hometown of Armavir. Upon reaching the forest, the police discovered a body about 3 hours away from Alla Alexenko's residence. The body was so badly burned that it was unrecognizable. Nadia identified her mother's body by her teeth. Despite a thorough investigation, the cause of Alla Alexenko's death has not been found. The police issued an arrest warrant for Victoria Nazarova and sent it to Interpol. However, Victoria escaped for a long time. Nadia returned to the United States after attending her mother's funeral in Kodar. For a long time, Nadia struggled to overcome the pain of losing her loved one. Finally, Nadia regained her health and vowed to her mother that she would pursue justice and hold the killer responsible for her mother's death accountable. One day, while surfing the internet, Nadia came across a post on social media. Victoria Nazarova, prime suspect in her mother's death, was living a lavish life in Mexico, seemingly unconcerned about her wanted status. Nadia informed the U.S. police about Victoria's whereabouts and the police began an investigation. Nadia then hired a top U.S. private investigator to speed up the investigation. A wealthy friend of Nadia's paid for the detective services, as Nadia could not afford them. At the time, Nadia had been unemployed for months due to her search for her mother. The private investigator analyzed Victoria's social media photos, including recent posts by Victoria. The investigator discovered that Victoria was in the United States. In one selfie, the sunglasses reflected the dashboard of a car. After examining several models, the investigator identified the car as a Chrysler 300. Detectives successfully tracked recent photos of Victoria to the Russian neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. By checking a database of similar cars in the area, police were able to narrow down the search and identify the culprit. Despite the challenges, police located Victoria and discovered that she lived with her boyfriend in a complex where the Chrysler was registered in his name. Unaware that Interpol was searching for her worldwide, Victoria posted the photos online without hesitation. Detectives identified Victoria's boyfriend and contacted him. It turned out that the boyfriend had been poisoned by Victoria and was seeking help. Furthermore, Victoria had poisoned her boyfriend's beagle, causing the dog to die. On March 20th, 2017, 41-year-old Victoria Nazarova was finally found and arrested. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Leaving Victoria at large posed a significant threat as she had the potential to harm many more people. When searching Victoria's apartment, the police discovered Olga TSBYK's identity card. Victoria's main motive for targeting Olga TSBYK was not only her desire for money and valuables, but Victoria also wanted a passport. Victoria's temporary visa was about to expire, and she needed a new ID card to stay in the country and avoid being tried in Russia. The face on Olga TSBYK's passport bore a strong resemblance to Victoria's. The police suspected that Victoria intended to kill Olga TSBYK and take her identity. Fortunately, Olga TSBYK's neighbor intervened, saving her life. When they further examined the poisoned cheesecake in the laboratory, they discovered a banned sedative, which Victoria had added to the cake. The investigation revealed that Victoria had used this sedative to carry out her plot. Victoria would increase the dosage to make the victim unconscious. Olga TSBYK was lucky to survive the incident. The unusually high temperature in her apartment was not accidental. Victoria deliberately increased the temperature to increase the effect of the sedative, which could have been fatal. Victoria clearly knew the situation in advance. To avoid suspicion, Victoria tried to cover her tracks by increasing the temperature in the house and dressing Olga Tsvyk in warm clothes. After her arrest, Victoria denied all charges, including her involvement in the disappearance and murder of Nadia's mother, as well as the intentional murder of Olga Tsvyk and the other victims. Police said Victoria was a suspect in the theft of 2 fur coats in May 2016, but the case was never solved. After several other incidents, it emerged that Victoria had been involved in the thefts, meeting men online, going to their homes, giving them drugs, and stealing from them. Most of the men did not go to the police for fear of publicity, and Victoria escaped conviction. The trial was postponed for about 6 years due to the pandemic and the lengthy preparation of the case file. The case finally went to trial in January 2023, attracting media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria remained silent. The court was forbidden from going into details about Alla Alexenko's death because the crime was committed in another country. Victoria's defense attorney said that there was no direct evidence or testimony linking Victoria to the crime, specifically the poisoning of the cheesecake and forcing Olga Tsvyk to eat it. According to Olga Tsvyk's testimony, Victoria brought 3 pieces of cheesecake to Olga Tsvyk's apartment, ate 2 in front of Olga Tsvyk, and then Olga Tsvyk ate the 3rd piece without hesitation. The prosecution argued that it was not an accident and that Victoria had deliberately added the drug to only 1 slice of the cake, knowing which one it was, and tricked Olga Tsvyk by eating the other 2 slices. After a thorough review of the case, the jury found Victoria Nazarova guilty of second-degree intentional homicide. Although the maximum sentence for this crime was 25 years in prison, the judge reduced the sentence to 21 years. However, by law, Victoria would be eligible for parole after 15 years in prison. Victoria Nazarova had been a sophisticated and stylish woman, but her life changed completely when she was sentenced to prison. The harsh realities of prison life took their toll on Victoria with inadequate and poor nutrition. A fight in prison left Victoria severely injured, almost losing her sight. Victoria took the prison to court, filing a lawsuit against the prison for negligence on the part of the guards who failed to assist during the violent incident. The case was eventually settled out of court, with Victoria receiving $325,000 in damages. In an interview from prison, Victoria maintained her innocence, denying the charges related to the crimes she committed. Victoria will serve the remainder of her sentence in a U.S. prison before being deported to Russia, where she will stand trial for her alleged involvement in the murder of Alla Alexenko. Alla Alexenko's daughter Nadia has expressed relief that Victoria is facing justice for her actions and will no longer be able to escape punishment. Alana Frick was born in 1977 in Windsor, Canada, to Joseph and Anna Frick. She had an older sister named Caroline. Her parents were originally from Croatia and had moved to Canada in the 1960s to work for General Motors. After Caroline's birth in 1970, the Fricks faced heartbreak, losing 2 pregnancies and being told by doctors they wouldn't be able to have more children. Against all odds, Ilana was born in 1977, and her parents saw her as nothing short of a miracle. When Elena was young, the family relocated from Windsor to Tecumseh, a small town in southwestern Ontario, where she grew up. Known as a bright and curious child, Elena spent much of her free time immersed in books. She attended St. Peter's Elementary School and later Santa Ana High School. In high school, she participated in Croatian folk dance and spent her summers working in nearby cornfields. Elena was also athletic, joining her school's track and field team. During her school years, Ilana met a boy named Meshu Rinald, and the two quickly became inseparable. They shared everything, from meals with each other's families to a deep love for music. In the 1990s, they fulfilled a shared dream of attending a Nirvana concert, their favorite band. Their bond seemed unshakable, and friends and family believed they were destined to marry. However, life took a turn after high school when Ilana began studying medicine at the University of Ottawa while Matthew stayed in their hometown. The long-distance relationship proved challenging, and despite their engagement, Elena eventually ended it, focusing entirely on her studies. Elena's drive to succeed stemmed from witnessing her parents' grueling work at the General Motors factory. She often remarked on how exhausting their jobs were and resolved to secure a career that offered financial stability and a better quality of life. Her determination paid off and she excelled during her time at medical school. In 2003, while working as a resident at the Ottawa Hospital, Ilana was playing pool in the recreation room when she caught the eye of Mohammed Shamji, a neurosurgery resident. Mohammed, the son of renowned thoracic surgeon Dr. Farid Shamji, came from a wealthy and prestigious family in Ottawa. He had attended the country's best schools and was considered a medical prodigy. Mohammed began joining Ilana for games of pool and eventually asked her out. Ilana was captivated by his intelligence, ambition, and elite background. Despite her growing feelings, she sometimes doubted whether she was good enough for him. Their relationship, however, was far from perfect. While Ilana was deeply invested, Mohammed's behavior often left her disappointed. He skipped her medical school graduation under the pretense of being ill, only for her to later discover he had been out with friends. He was also unfaithful, seeing another woman from his university days. Despite these red flags, Mohammed's charm and persistence convinced Elena to stay with him, even after she had tried ending the relationship twice. In April 2004, Elena introduced Mohammed to her parents. Joseph and Anna were unimpressed, finding him distant and disinterested in engaging with them. Joseph advised Ilana not to settle for someone like Mohammed, believing she deserved better. One morning, Anna overheard the couple arguing. When she asked what was wrong, Ilana, visibly upset, insisted it was nothing more than a sleepless night. Anna left them alone, assuming it was just a harmless disagreement. Not long after, Ilana discovered she was pregnant. Mohammed faced a dilemma, as his Muslim parents would be furious about an out-of-wedlock child and his choice to marry outside their faith. Weighing his options, Mohammed decided marriage was the best solution. Together, he and Ilana began planning 2 weddings, one to honor his family's traditions and another for hers. On September 1st, 2004, Ilana and Mohammed held a traditional Muslim ceremony in Ottawa. At nearly 5 months pregnant, Ilana adhered to the customs, including having her hands adorned with intricate henna designs, which her Christian mother found unsettling. The wedding highlighted the stark contrast between the couple's backgrounds. Ilana's guests were primarily hardworking relatives, while Mohammed's were prominent figures in the medical community. Alcohol was officially forbidden at the ceremony, though some guests discreetly drank in the parking lot. While their union seemed like a compromise between their different worlds, the complexities of their relationship hinted at the challenges that lay ahead. Before their second wedding at a Catholic church, Ilana and Mohammed were required to attend several counseling sessions. Mohammed, however, refused to participate and asked John Mark, a mutual friend, to attend in his place. When John declined, the sessions were skipped entirely. Despite Mohammed's indifference and lack of effort, the couple proceeded with a small wedding ceremony at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Windsor. Unlike their first wedding, this one was modest, with fewer guests. To hide the lingering henna tattoos on her hands, Ilana wore elbow-length white gloves. After the ceremony, the couple rode in a limousine to the Caesars Hotel and Casino, where they spent part of their honeymoon. Shortly after, they purchased a home in Ottawa and moved there. Ilana began working as a family doctor at the Ottawa Hospital while Mohammed continued his residency in neurosurgery. In January 2005, after a challenging pregnancy, Ilana gave birth to a baby girl. She was overjoyed by the arrival of her daughter, but Mohammed appeared detached and uninvolved. His focus remained on his career, often retreating to the upstairs study as soon as he returned home, barely interacting with his wife or child. Tensions grew when Mohammed's family visited shortly after the baby's birth. Ilana, upstairs breastfeeding, didn't come down to greet them, which enraged Mohammed. Later, he berated her, claiming it was her duty to welcome guests at the door as a sign of respect. Feeling increasingly isolated, Ilana confided in her parents, saying she felt as if she were walking on eggshells in her own home. Over time, Mohammed's controlling behavior escalated, and he began having unprovoked fits of anger. While Ilana rarely spoke about her struggles, friends and family noticed her growing unhappiness. Muhammad also criticized her appearance, ridiculing her weight gain and belittling her cooking. A month after the baby's birth, tensions reached a breaking point when Muhammad, in a panic, called Alana's parents, claiming she wanted a divorce. Alana quickly took the phone from him, assured her parents that everything was fine, and ended the call. Not long after, while her parents were preparing to attend church one Sunday, they received a missed call from Elena's home. Using their phone's redial feature, they called back, only to overhear a heated argument. Muhammad's furious insults toward Alana echoed through the line, leaving her parents horrified. In the spring of 2005, Muhammad was accepted into a prestigious PhD program in biomedical engineering at Duke University in North Carolina. Seeing this as an opportunity, Alana enrolled in Duke's master's program in public policy, and the couple planned to move to the United States that fall. However, just days before the move, an argument turned violent, and Muhammad physically assaulted Alana. Terrified, she took her daughter and sought refuge at a friend's apartment. Muhammad, unaware of her location, began calling mutual friends until he eventually found her. After 3 days, he promised to stay with his parents if she returned home. Still afraid, Elena agreed, but asked John Mark to stay nearby for protection until her own parents could arrive. Following the incident, Muhammad faced 3 criminal charges, 1 for assaulting Alana and 2 for issuing threats. These charges jeopardized both his career and his ability to cross the U.S. border to begin his studies at Duke. To salvage his future, Muhammad worked to reconcile with Alana. A few weeks later, the family baptized their daughter in a church in Windsor. When guests at the reception asked why Muhammad wasn't there, Alana told some he was working, but privately admitted to her cousin Rob that they'd had another fight. Rob urged her to leave Muhammad, assuring her she could find someone who truly loved her. Alana, however, insisted they would work things out. On July 27, 2005, the authorities agreed to drop the charges against Muhammad if he signed a peace bond. As part of the agreement, he had to acknowledge that Alana had reasonable grounds to fear him and accept a 12-month probation. With the charges dismissed just in time, Muhammad was able to begin his PhD at Duke and cross the border without issue. He moved to Durham, North Carolina to start his program, and Alana and their daughter joined him a few months later. Friends and family couldn't understand why Alana returned to Muhammad. She was intelligent, financially independent, and had the unwavering support of her family. While some speculated that she was drawn to the status her relationship with Muhammad provided, others believed she truly loved him and held on to hope that their relationship could improve. In Durham, the couple settled into a routine. They began running marathons together, often waking up before dawn to train. Afterward, Alana would drop their daughter off at daycare before heading to Duke University with Muhammad. Muhammad excelled in his program, completing his 5-year PhD in just 3.5 years. Despite his professional success, the cracks in their marriage remained, hinting at deeper challenges that could not be resolved by a change in location. Alana excelled during her studies at Duke University, earning a rare scholarship that covered most of her tuition and being recognized as the best in her class. After her classes, she would pick up Muhammad and their baby before heading home to prepare dinner, a routine she repeated almost daily. In 2007, nearly 2 years later, Alana became pregnant again and gave birth to the couple's second daughter in November. Friends of the couple noticed an imbalance in their marriage. Alana was the one who drove Muhammad everywhere he needed to go. When her friend Valentina Nikolova asked her about it, Alana simply explained that Muhammad disliked driving. But the imbalance extended beyond transportation. Alana was responsible for nearly everything in their household, from grocery shopping to assembling furniture and even changing light bulbs. Despite her efforts, Alana often downplayed her own importance, frequently telling friends how brilliant Muhammad was, and how insignificant she felt in comparison. To outsiders, Alana appeared to hold control in the relationship. Yet, she always sought Muhammad's permission for even the smallest decisions, displaying an unusual submissiveness. Meanwhile, Muhammad would call her multiple times whenever she was out, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. In 2009, after completing their studies at Duke, the couple returned to Ottawa, and and moved into a house near the hospital where they both began working. Ilana quickly became a beloved family doctor admired by her patients, while Muhammad advanced in his neurosurgery specialization, earning an award for the exceptional care he provided. Around this time, the couple became active on social media, portraying themselves as a wealthy, happy family with beautiful children. However, close friends knew that Muhammad controlled Ilana's accounts, dictating which photos she could post and even pressuring her to harass people he didn't like. Muhammad's controlling nature extended beyond social media and into their daily lives. He denied Ilana permission to subscribe to her favorite newspaper and restricted who their daughters could play with, dismissing children from less affluent families. He often insulted Ilana, calling her useless and stupid, and claimed he would have been better off without her. In 2011, Muhammad moved to Calgary for a year to complete a spinal surgery fellowship. Shortly after, Elena discovered he was having an affair. She found emails confirming the relationship and noticed a credit card charge for a hotel stay with his mistress on Mother's Day. When confronted, Muhammad didn't deny the infidelity. Devastated, Ilana considered leaving him, encouraged by friends who believed she deserved better. Yet she stayed. Ilana yearned for his approval, believed she had invested too much in their life together, and hoped to prove she was worthy of his love. Muhammad promised to end the affair, and shortly after, he secured his dream job as a neurosurgeon at Toronto Western Hospital. The couple relocated to Toronto, purchasing a $1.5 million home in North York. Elena left her job in Ottawa and eventually found a position at the Earl Bales Clinic. However, she admitted to friends that the new job didn't excite her. She had worked hard to gain knowledge and felt her skills were underutilized. Once settled, Muhammad suggested having another child, noting they had an empty room in their home and expressing his desire for a son. Ilana agreed, hoping a new baby would breathe life into their strained marriage. In October 2013, the couple welcomed a baby boy. For nearly 2 years after his birth, their relationship seemed to stabilize. During this time, Ilana grew close to her new boss, Allison Kaufman, who lived across the street from their home. Their daughters thrived in private school, and Muhammad gained a reputation at Toronto Western Hospital for performing miraculous surgeries. In 2015, Ilana left her clinic job to work at Scarborough Hospital's Family Medicine Unit and became a district delegate for the Ontario Medical Association. Though her career was flourishing, Muhammad resented her success, reigniting tensions in their marriage. In March 2016, the family traveled to Vermont, stopping in Ottawa first to leave their youngest son with Muhammad's parents. That evening, Muhammad called Elena's parents, claiming she had severely cut her right palm and was undergoing surgery. Ilana later provided conflicting explanations for her injury, including hitting a glass on the counter, cutting vegetables, and breaking a dish while washing. None of her stories seemed plausible, and it was clear her wound wasn't accidental. In Vermont, tensions escalated further. The couple argued about Muhammad's affair in Calgary, during which he cruelly compared Ilana to his former mistress, claiming the other woman was far superior. The argument turned violent when Muhammad attempted to strangle Ilana. Later, Ilana confided in friends about the incident, but chose not to report it, fearing how U.S. authorities might handle a man named Muhammad. A few months later, the couple celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, which would ultimately be their last. Ilana gave Muhammad a heartfelt card that read, "My dearest Muhammad, I love you with all my heart. 12 years, 3 kids, 4 cities, 2 countries, and a lifetime of memories. I can't wait for the next 50 years." But the truth was far darker than her words suggested. By late 2016, Ilana had started discussing divorce with Muhammad. Panicked, he begged her to reconsider, and though she agreed to think it over, her suspicions grew that he was involved with another woman. When Ilana confided her suspicions to her friends, one jokingly suggested that she should get a lover herself. Surprisingly, Ilana did just that. She met another doctor who was also married with children. He treated her with kindness and made her feel desired again. Ilana later told a friend it was the first time she'd experienced a shred of happiness since marrying Muhammad. Her lover encouraged her to leave Muhammad and imagine a life without him. Emboldened, Alana consulted a lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. She revealed something she hadn't told anyone else, that Muhammad had assaulted her violently in October. It was the final straw for Alana, who decided she needed to leave, not just for herself, but for the safety of her children. By late November, Alana officially filed for divorce. Muhammad attempted to win her back by gifting her a large box of chocolates, but she remained resolute. On November 24th, she sent an email to a friend apologizing for her recent absence. "I'm in the process of separating from my husband and things at home are chaotic. I'll try to catch up with you this weekend. I'll be away at a conference." Alana attended the conference that Friday where she spoke on panels, networked, and socialized. Muhammad messaged her throughout the weekend, feigning the role of a supportive husband. Upon returning home Sunday night, Alana told her close friends that she had served Muhammad with divorce papers. Her lawyer had contacted him on Monday, emphasizing Alana's desire for an amicable and swift resolution and requesting full financial disclosure. Alana moved into the basement of their home, but Muhammad repeatedly moved her belongings back into the master bedroom. On December 1st, 2016, Alana's family tried unsuccessfully to reach her throughout the day. Worried, they called Muhammad, who hesitantly claimed that Alana had left the house the night before with a suitcase and her boyfriend. Alana's mother, knowing her daughter would never abandon her children, contacted Allison Kaufman, Alana's former boss and neighbor, asking her to check the house. Allison peered into the garage and saw that Alana's car was still parked there. She informed Alana's parents, who immediately called the police and set out on an overnight drive from Windsor to Toronto. When officers arrived at the house, Muhammad repeated his story about Alana leaving with a suitcase. Following protocol, they searched the residence for any signs of her, but found nothing. Later that day, police discovered a woman's body stuffed inside a suitcase near the Humber River. She was barefoot, dressed in pajamas, and had severe head injuries. The autopsy revealed she had been beaten, sustaining blunt force trauma before being strangled. The body was taken to Elena's parents for identification. While Elena's mother, Anna, couldn't recognize her daughter due to the swelling and damage to her face, her father, Joseph, tearfully confirmed her identity. "This is my daughter." The investigation quickly pointed to Muhammad Shamji as the sole suspect. He was arrested the next day at a cafe where undercover officers handcuffed him at his table. Police discovered that Alana had attempted to call 911 on the night of her murder, but only managed to dial 611 before Muhammad stopped her. It was also revealed that he killed her while their 3 children were in the house. Their eldest daughter later recounted hearing her mother's screams from her room. Fearing an intruder, she crept to her parents' bedroom and saw her father lying face down on the bed. When he noticed her, he ordered her back to her room. The crime shocked Canada, garnering widespread media attention. The seemingly perfect marriage of 2 accomplished doctors had ended in unimaginable tragedy. Elena's funeral was held on December 17, 2016, at St. Francis of Assisi Church in Windsor, the same church where she had been baptized and married the man who would eventually take her life. While awaiting Muhammad's trial, Joseph and Anifrik moved into their daughter's home to care for their grandchildren, ensuring they could remain in their school during such a difficult time. In May 2019, over 2 years after the crime, Muhammad Shamji pleaded guilty as part of a deal with prosecutors, avoiding a full trial. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. The case received extensive media coverage, and millions of Canadians followed the sentencing. Alana's eldest daughter publicly stated that she hated her father for what he had done and doubted she could ever forgive him. Today, Alana's children live with their maternal grandparents in Windsor. They frequently talk about their mother, but refuse to mention their father's name. The case of Candy Rogers. Candace Rogers, also known as Candy, was born on July 18, 1949, in Spokane, Washington. She was an only child in her family, and soon after she was born, her parents divorced. Despite this, Candy maintained a close relationship with her father. Her father lived in the same city, so she got to see him frequently. Candy was a bright and cheerful child who loved spending time outdoors with friends, exploring nature, and playing with her dog. She had a strong desire to join the Campfire Girls, a well-known organization that provided girls with opportunities to learn new skills, go on hikes, and form lasting friendships. In 1959, at the age of 9, Candy finally got the chance to join the Campfire Girls, and she was overjoyed. As a member of Campfire Girls, one of her responsibilities was to sell mints door to door in her neighborhood. The organization provided her with boxes of sweets to sell. On Friday, March 6th, Candy planned to sell mints after school. After returning home, having dinner, and playing with her dog, she packed 8 boxes of mints and set out around 4 p.m. Candy had a plan to go door to door in her neighborhood, offering sweets to her neighbors. To avoid duplicating efforts, she and the other girls in the area had assigned specific streets to visit. However, when Candy failed to return home by 6 p.m. as expected, her mom started to worry. As night began to fall, her mom and grandfather set out to search for her, scouring the neighborhood streets but finding no sign of Candy. Soon, some family friends and neighbors joined the search, but despite their combined efforts, no one could find any trace of Candy. At this point, her mom decided to call the police for assistance. By the time the police arrived, the streets were dark and something might have happened to Candy. The police began their investigation by questioning the neighbors and soon discovered that Candy had only sold 1 box of mints, suggesting that something might have occurred shortly after she left her house. A resident reported suggesting that something might have occurred shortly after she left her house. A resident reported seeing a girl matching Candy's description on a nearby street around 6:30 p.m. This was unusual, as Candy's mother had already begun searching for her by that time. Candy's grandfather had a strange experience as well, which occurred when he searched for her on the very same street. He narrowly avoided being hit by a speeding green 1953 Ford, which struck the curb. Unfortunately, he couldn't see the license plate number. The police issued a detailed description of the vehicle and initiated a search, but so far they have not been able to locate it. Later, around 9 p.m., several mint boxes were found scattered along the road near a bridge. These boxes belonged to Candy, increasing concerns for her safety. The police focused their search in this area, thoroughly searching both riverbanks and a small wooded area on either side. Despite an all-night search, Candy was not found. By morning, news of her disappearance had spread through local newspapers, and soon the case was being covered by statewide media. In 1959, child disappearances near their homes were unusual because it happened extremely rarely. The townspeople were extremely worried about this. To resolve this alarming situation, police have stepped up search work. They added mounted police, all-terrain vehicles, and helicopters and military personnel to thoroughly search the area. In addition, over 1,000 volunteers joined in the massive search from both local areas and nearby cities. It became one of the most extensive search operations at the time. Despite these efforts, they still could not locate Candy. Another incident that added to the trauma of the town was when a search helicopter struck power lines and crashed. As a result, 3 of its crew members died. However, police remained dedicated and relentless, operating 24/7 on this case. With so many investigations open, officers still tried everything. Throughout the case, nearly 750 initial leads turned up. Officers closely inspected every detail. Regrettably, these investigative trails did not help discover any definitive proof about Candy's. 2 weeks after Candy's disappearance, 2 military personnel from a local base went on a hunting trip in the woods west of Spokane. They stumbled upon children's shoes on the ground, which immediately reminded them of Candy's case. Since many military members had been involved in the search, they were familiar with the details of her disappearance. The military personnel reported their discovery to the police, who then showed the shoes to Candy's grandfather for identification. He confirmed that the shoes belonged to his granddaughter. The police quickly launched a search operation in the woods. Within minutes, an officer spotted a foot protruding from the bushes and discovered Candy's body. She was found lying in the underbrush, covered with pine branches. A medical examination revealed the cause of death was strangulation. Also found marks on Candy's hands and feet, indicating that she had been bound, although no ropes were found near the body. Furthermore, the medical experts concluded that Candy had been sexually abused. During the investigation, the police found a green car seat cover near the crime scene. Additionally, a small purple stain was discovered on Candy's clothing, which smelled like grape-flavored chewing gum. However, the police were unable to establish any connection between the stain and the crime. The police searched for any possible clues to find the killer. They examined incoming tips and investigated hundreds of individuals, including neighbors, suspicious characters, and previously convicted criminals. Their attention eventually turned to a 50-year-old man named Alfred Braves. Alfred became a suspect due to unusual circumstances. He took his own life on the same day Candy's body was discovered, in his car, near where the mint boxes were found. He also lived close to Candy's home. When police found Alfred's body, they discovered a rope and woman's hair pins in his car. After searching Alfred's house, police found numerous newspapers about sexual crimes against women and girls. They also learned that several women had accused him of harassment and his wife suspected him of Candy's murder. However, investigators were unable to find any evidence directly linking Alfred to Candy's murder. Despite their reluctance, detectives had to eliminate him from the suspect list as they did not have enough evidence to prove his guilt. As a result, they began investigating other suspects. Several months after the murder, the police had compiled an extensive list of suspects, but despite their diligent efforts, the investigation has made no new progress. Later, the investigators turned their attention to a new suspect, a serial killer named Hugh Morse. Hugh was arrested in 1961 for a string of crimes, and two factors made him a person of interest in Candy's case. Firstly, he was known for constantly chewing grape-flavored gum, which was similar to a substance found on Candy's clothing. Additionally, Hugh had killed two women in Spokane just a few months after Candy's death. Hugh's history of violence was also a concern. His first arrest was for assaulting a woman, but he received no serious consequences, merely being discharged from the army, where he was serving at the time. Hugh committed a string of robberies in Los Angeles, but only served 6 months in jail. After his release, he lured two 8-year-old girls to a secluded area with the promise of ice cream and then sexually assaulted them. Despite being arrested again, he managed to avoid prison time. A medical commission evaluated him and deemed him a sexual psychopath, leading to his placement in a mental health facility. 2 years later, doctors believed he was cured and released him from the facility. Hugh then moved to Spokane, where he began spying on women through their windows. In November 1959, Hugh broke into the home of a 28-year-old woman, assaulted her, and ultimately killed her. 10 months later, he entered the residence of a 69-year-old woman and repeated the same violent actions. A month after that, he attacked another woman, stabbing her multiple times, but she survived the assault. Hugh continued to travel from city to city, committing numerous crimes, including attacking women and girls with a knife, sexually assaulting them, and killing 2 more victims. His crimes eventually caught the attention of the FBI, and he was added to the list of the country's 10 most wanted criminals. He was eventually captured and sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. While serving his sentence, Hugh attempted to take his own life, but was saved by the prison guards and continued to serve out his sentence. Detectives investigating Candy's case visited him in prison multiple times, but he consistently denied any involvement in the crime. A polygraph test was also administered, which suggested he was telling the truth. However, lie detector test results are not considered reliable because their accuracy is only relative. Despite the lack of evidence, but investigators initially considered Hugh a primary suspect, due to his background and the fact that he lived in Spokane at the time of the murder. However, he continued to deny any involvement and police were unable to find any evidence to prove his involvement in the crime. The investigation then shifted focus to another suspect, 49-year-old Howard Barnett. He was arrested in February 1960 on suspicion of molesting a minor girl. Before taking his own life in his cell at the Spokane police station, Barnett wrote a cryptic message in his own blood on the wall, stating, "I have a sin before the Lord." Detectives then began investigating Barnett's potential involvement in the crime. but they were once again unable to find any evidence of his guilt. Howard remained a primary suspect in the case due to his proximity to Candy's residence. Despite years of investigation, police continue to follow new leads and examine other potential suspects. A woman eventually came forward claiming to have seen a green car following Candy on the day she disappeared. Police refocused on locating the vehicle, but this lead ultimately yielded no results. It was notable that the woman waited many years to share this information. The case was reopened at various times, but each time investigators reached a dead end. Throughout the investigation, police not only had to pursue new leads, but also had to verify the validity of confessions. 13 people gave false confessions to the crime. However, none of them were able to provide specific details that only the actual killer would have known. Instead, they often repeated details previously reported in the media. High-profile cases often exhibit unexpected and surprising behaviors, such as false confessions. In the case of Candy's murder, numerous detectives worked on the case over time, but none were able to solve it. This crime stood out as one of the most prominent and mysterious in the city and state. Before the murder, parents felt safe letting their children play outside, but the case led many to reconsider their views on safety. Years later, in the early 2000s, the case was reopened and a new detective decided to use modern technologies to re-examine the evidence. Fortunately, the police had carefully collected and preserved the evidence in 1959, including a sample of male semen on Candy's clothing. Despite being stored for decades, experts were able to re-examine the sample, although it extremely challenging due to its age. After a lengthy investigation, experts finally extracted a DNA profile from the evidence and uploaded it to the FBI database. However, a search of the database yielded no matches. Further cross-examination of the profile with numerous suspect samples also proved unsuccessful. For many years, suspicion fell on Hugh Morse, but forensic evidence revealed no link between him and the crime. This lack of progress brought the investigation to a halt once again. Although the police had the killer's DNA, they struggled to identify the perpetrator. In 2021, a new detective reopened the case and decided to employ a new approach: genetic genealogy. This innovative method had already solved numerous cold cases and offered hope for finally resolving the standing mystery surrounding Candy's murder. The detective reached out to multiple labs that specialized in this type of analysis but was met with disappointment once again. To use this method, experts needed the original DNA sample, which was a challenge. Several labs attempted to work with the semen sample, but each concluded that it had degraded too much, making it impossible to extract the necessary information. The detective then consulted the final lab, which led to a long-awaited important discovery. With the help of state-of-the-art tools, the experts were able to successfully analyze the sample and obtain the perpetrator's DNA profile. This profile is then uploaded to a genealogy database to begin searching for the DNA owner's relatives. After a thorough investigation involving thousands of individuals, researchers pinpointed one family as the likely source of the DNA sample. They discovered that the DNA probably belonged to one of 3 brothers, all of whom had passed away. However, the team found that one brother had a daughter, and the police reached out to her for assistance. The daughter was shocked by the possibility that her father might be the killer, but she immediately agreed to help. She provided a DNA sample, proving that she was closely related to the person whose semen was found on Candy's clothing. With this new information, detectives obtained a court order to exhume her father's remains. A DNA profile extracted from the remains revealed a complete match with the DNA found on Candy's clothing, identifying the killer as John Hoff, 62 years after the crime. Hoff had never been a suspect despite hundreds of others being investigated over the years. Detectives investigating Hoff's biography uncovered his involvement in multiple crimes. At the time of Candy's murder, Hoff was 20 years old and lived close to her house, less than a mile away. He was also a soldier in the army, stationed at a nearby base where Candy's body was found. 2 years after the murder, attacked another woman, binding and sexually assaulting her before attempting to kill her. However, the woman survived the attack. Following his arrest, Hoff received a 6-month prison sentence and was dishonorably discharged from the army. After his release, Hoff started a family, having 2 sons and 2 daughters, and he living an ordinary life. He changed jobs several times and at one point suffered a severe chemical burn to his face while working at a food packaging plant, leave a scar to his face. Hoff's life ended in June 1970, 11 years after Candy's murder, when he took his own life without leaving a note. Further investigation revealed that Candy might have known Hoff, as she was friends with his 10-year-old sister at the time. Years later, Hoff's sister told detectives that she had cried in Hoff's arms after Candy's murder, unaware that he was the one responsible for Candy's death. Candy's parents did not live to see the day when the killer's identity was revealed. Her mother passed away in 2006, and her father had taken his own life in 1963, 4 years after the tragedy. The reason behind his death remains a mystery. There is speculation that he was unable to cope with the loss of his daughter. Despite this, the case was eventually solved, marking one of the longest investigations in history, spanning over 62 years and involving multiple detectives across different generations. At the press conference, where the killer's name was announced, only one officer who had worked on the case in 1959 was present. He expressed gratitude for having lived long enough to learn the truth. Hoff's daughter initially struggled to accept that her father had committed such a horrific crime. However, she eventually came to terms with the fact, referring to her father as a monster who took an innocent life. She expressed regret that he was not held accountable during his lifetime. A chilling coincidence is that Hoff took his own life when his daughter was 9 years old, the same age as Candy was when she was killed. A group of hikers in Tennessee discovered a dead body on December 22, 1974, while using a shortcut close to the Ober Mountain Aerial Tramway. Then known as the Gatlinburg Ski Lodge Tramway, the woman's corpse was found next to a tree, face down on her cloak, as if she had been sitting there moments before her untimely demise. The most puzzling part is that it took almost 50 years to identify a woman who went by only Jane Doe, with the body not being identified until 2023. According to the initial forensic reports, she was estimated to be about 35 years old when she passed away. How could it have happened that she ended up in this isolated place? How come it took nearly 50 years to identify this victim? Hello and welcome to Mystery Detective, a channel dedicated to delving into the murky mysteries surrounding both cold and solved cases worldwide. Tennessee is to the east of Gatlinburg, praised for its astounding natural beauty. It is well known as a gateway town, surrounded by the magnificent Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Despite being rather expensive, Gatlinburg has maintained its cozy, family-friendly atmosphere over the years. This quaint mountain community with a resort feel is well known for its rich history, excellent shopping, and stunning scenery. With only 3,800 residents, Gatlinburg might seem like a small town. However, beneath its lovely exterior, the location hides mysteries that have been kept secret for a very long time. It was December 22, 1974, a chilly morning in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. A bunch of Georgian friends made the decision to go hiking in a remote area that isn't often visited. They chose to go to their chalet by a shorter route. As they strolled along the lonely trail, something unexpected caught them off guard. At Gatlinburg Ski Lodge under the tramway station were found the remains of a woman beside a tree. She lay face down on an open cloak as if she had been sitting there prior to her untimely demise. The state of affairs was appalling, and the remains had decomposed to such an extent that it seemed impossible to identify her. As they attempted to make sense of the startling discovery, many questions raced through their minds. The men knew they needed to report this to the police. Facing such a terrifying discovery, they quickly called the Gatlinburg police, hoping for a prompt response to look into this horrific circumstance. What they found was a horrifying enigma, a riddle with no clear answers. Identification was nearly impossible due to the decomposition of the dead body. There were no obvious hints discovered in the area or close to her body that would have indicated who she was or how she died. This woman seemed to have been consumed by the remoteness of the place. Authorities encountered an investigation that appeared to grow more intricate by the minute as they started their probe. Her remains, when found, revealed that she had passed away approximately 2 months prior to their discovery. The investigators later referred to this woman as Jane Doe because they had no idea who she was. According to the assessment, Jane Doe was 5 feet 8 inches tall, white, and between 30 and 45 years old. Her weight was about 140 pounds. Her hair, which was cut short and had a blonde and brown combination, was found mostly near her remains. When Jane Doe was found, she had no shoes on and was only wearing short brown men's socks. Beside her, her sweater and coat were neatly laid out. She wore extra-large male-like marpai slacks, a white short-sleeve shirt with yellow flowers, and a white button-down sweet tree sweater. There was no finding of any jewelry or other personal items she might have had on her at the time. In the absence of immediate identification, authorities turned to the resources at their disposal. Both her DNA and dental records were available for potential future research. Her fingerprints were regrettably unusable, which increased the mystery surrounding her case. Identifying Jane Doe's body proved to be a challenging task for Sevier County Medical Examiner Dr. John Hickey. Given the complexity of the situation, Dr. Hickey sought assistance from the state's forensic anthropologist, William Bass. They consented to have the body brought to the hospital mortuary for an autopsy. The investigation into Jane Doe's explained death commenced, and case number 74-11 was assigned to it. The goal of the autopsy was to determine what caused her death. Regretfully, the report did not provide a conclusive cause of death, despite the best efforts of the medical professionals. Although this finding eliminated the possibility of foul play, it raised more questions about Jane Doe's demise. In January of 1975, the hunt for the identity of this enigmatic woman intensified. Investigators put in a lot of overtime, contacting neighboring states such as South Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia, and writing letters to different police departments. The TBI and FBI were contacted to offer support. They searched for clues to her identity, but were unable to find any, which led to a depressing stop. Investigators were baffled by the Jane Doe mystery for years. They created a composite image of her face in 2007 using computer technology. The investigators were able to get a glimpse of her actual appearance thanks to this incredible reconstruction. Her height, weight, hair color, and eye color were all calculated in the hopes that this composite would help someone remember her and help identify her. But when this new lead failed to yield a breakthrough, investigators' hopes were dashed again. Unfazed by the persistent challenges, they looked into a state-of-the-art identification technique in 2007 by utilizing the dental identification system of the National Crime Information Center. Jane Doe's identity remained a mystery in spite of this. It seemed that the case would never be resolved. In an effort to find out the truth, the case was reported to the National Missing and Unidentified Person Systems. The identity of Jane Doe remained a mystery for decades despite constant investigation. Consequently, this case eventually turned cold. Just like a lot of others, Detective Cindy Myers of the Gatlinburg Police Department took on this case in 2021. Myers had been plagued by the mystery of the mysterious Jane Doe for a considerable amount of time, even after years of intensive research. She wasn't sure the mystery would ever be unraveled, but Detective Myers was determined to revive the cold case, even though she knew that technology had advanced significantly since the 1970s. A specialized laboratory in Texas, renowned for its proficiency in forensic genetic genealogy testing, was the place Detective Myers turned to for answers. A US-based company called Offram focuses on utilizing genetic genealogy to crack cold cases, like unsolved murders and disappearances, through the use of single nucleotide polymorphism and short tandem repeat testing. They provide law enforcement agencies with the instruments and techniques necessary to ascertain family ties among victims, regardless of how closely or distantly related they are. They also offer DNA forensic genome sequencing as one of their services. Chained Doe skeletal remains were carefully transported to Offram's lab, where a thorough examination was conducted. A thorough DNA profile was created by Offram's experts using forensic gray genome sequencing. The DNA profile was utilized by Offram's genetic genealogy team to locate potential Jane Doe relatives. They carefully pieced together a likely connection to the unidentified woman, following each lead that led them down a convoluted path through public records and family trees. It was a challenging process that required perseverance and unwavering concentration. February of 2023 brought rewards for their efforts. Officials from Offram called Detective Cindy Myers with some startling information. They had found a possibility in a mass to an Arkansas-based woman. Investigators traveled to find this woman, and they learned an incredible fact. She disclosed that her sister had vanished in August of 1974, with the last known sighting occurring in Tennessee. This discovery allowed for the critical piece of the puzzle to be assembled. The woman in Arkansas promptly provided a DNA sample, which was then submitted for direct comparison with Jane Doe's remains. Finally, after all these years, the result was known. Charlotte Roberta Henry, who was only 35 years old when she passed away, was positively identified as Jane Doe. She was the sister of the individual whose DNA was obtained for comparative analysis. On January 4, 1939, Charlotte Roberta Henry was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to Paul and Roberta. Her sister's name remains unknown, but she had a brother named Paul Henry. But what is known about her early years is scarce. She had blonde-brown hair, hazel eyes, and was about 5 feet 8 inches tall. We don't know anything about her marital status or if she had children. The only thing that is known for sure is that her family last saw her at her father's funeral in April of 1974. All communication with her abruptly stopped after that terrible incident. Her family didn't receive a letter from her until August of that year. The family had no idea that this would be the last letter they would receive from her. The authorities never wavered in their quest for answers, and the confirmation of Jane Doe's identity as Charlotte Roberta Henry was a momentous occasion. They have now received closure on this protracted case. Although the reason for Charlotte's passing and the events leading up to it are still unknown, her identification ends a nearly half-century-long mystery. The Gatlinburg Police Department's investigative division has received praise from Police Chief Randy Brackens for their unwavering commitment to solving this case. Over the years, a number of detectives in our investigative division have worked this case to ascertain Ms. Henry's identity. Despite a tragic conclusion, the revelation provides much-needed peace to Ms. Henry's sister, who had been living in constant uncertainty for almost 50 years about her sister's whereabouts. Now that the family has answers thanks to the investigators' persistence, the situation's ongoing tragedy can be put to rest. Though it is impossible to claim that this poor victim received justice, at least this tragic case was resolved when it appeared impossible at first. What do you think happened to Charlotte Roberta Henry? A skeleton wearing a checkered shirt surfaced from the waters of a deserted island. With few to no hints, the remains washed up on Spencer Island, carrying a sinister mystery that has baffled detectives for years. The body was buried by the sheriff's office on the grounds that it was a cold case. However, as time goes on, the man would speak from the dead and give his identity 44 years later. Hello and welcome back to Mystery Detective, where we explore the most engrossing stories of murders that have been solved and unsolved, as well as dark secrets from all around the world. In the late 1970s, a terrifying discovery occurred on the outskirts of Spencer Island in the middle of the rapidly expanding suburban environment of Marysville, Washington. This peaceful location, well known for its stunning variety of shorebirds and ducks, ended up serving as the unexpected location for a terrifying occurrence that would forever haunt the neighborhood of Marysville. As the natives gathered on the Spencer Island in search of consolation in the peace that bird viewing offers, an unwary duck hunter approached the island's shore, unknowing of the tragedy that waited for him. It happened on January 3, 1979. In the early morning, the previous week's temperature had been below freezing, and by January 3rd, the air finally felt a little bit warmer. A few residents of Marysville decided to have some serene moments at Spencer Island. Among these residents was a desperate duck hunter who entered the barren abyss in search of a catch, despite the icy winter of 1979. At that point, he had no idea that fate had another surprise in store for him. He came out of the depths and witnessed something that was nearly surreal. A horrifying image appeared before his eyes. The mysterious island's bleak tidal flats were plagued by a ghostly skeleton that looked like a Halloween decoration and was tragically caught in a web of fishing line. In the Snohomish River Delta, a shoe, a leg bone, and a pair of tampons were found together in an odd grouping by a 12-foot wooden piling. The Hender's focus was then caught by a red checkered shirt next to a downseater. Soon after, he made the startling discovery of a skull and another black leather shoe with a foot inside. The scene was nothing less than a terrifying riddle that needed to be solved. The hunter called the police right away to report what his eyes had witnessed. When officers arrived, the red, orange, gray, and white checkered clothing was identified by detectives working on the case. A human skull and a shoe with a foot still inside were lying 5 feet apart. While keeping in mind all these horrifying facts, detectives also discovered a belt in a size 33 or 34 and a pair of lace-up shoes in a size 8. The rubber heels of the shoes were imprinted with the O'Sullivan logo. The khaki pants tag stated that they were made in the USA. These discoveries provided crucial information for the man's identity. His leather wallet was also discovered. Although it was empty of cash and identification, the victim seemed to have passed away many months prior. From the point of discovery onward, the victim was identified by the sheriff's office as John Doe 79-1. Due to the skeletal remains decomposition, it was impossible to ascertain the cause of death. At the time, there were no dental records that could be matched to the body. The body was buried in Cypress Lawn Cemetery a few months later, on March 15, 1979, by the Cassidy Funeral Home. Because there wasn't much technology available at the time, unexplained bodies were frequently buried. In the past, DNA technology wasn't as developed. Therefore, human remains weren't stored in the medical examiner's office until they were identified or claimed. Since nobody in the neighborhood was reported missing, there was no chance of identifying this body. The need to identify the body became less urgent as the years went by. The investigation quickly went cold and was forgotten. In 2008, a team of detectives started revisiting unresolved or unexplained crimes in Snohomish County. Many of these cases were solved thanks to developments in DNA technologies. In an effort to locate and identify 1979 John Doe through DNA samples, the team sought to exhume the deceased. However, the examination itself and the considerable documentation required to secure permissions for the excavation can make the entire procedure take years. John Doe was unaware and unaffected by all that was happening above his grave. 7 years later, in 2015, the remains were finally excavated from Cypress Lawn, under the supervision of the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office team and the Medical Examiner's Office. This came about after many years and a lot of paperwork. After the body was moved to the Medical Examiner's Office, he was then identified as Spencer Island Doe that same year in 2015 in an effort to identify Spencer Island Doe by his teeth. Forensic dentist Dr. Kyle Tanaka had collected his dental radiographs, charted his teeth, and uploaded the information to the National Crime Information Center. The National Crime Information Center is the FBI's computerized index that covers both criminal cases and instances involving missing persons. It enables law enforcement officials in other parts of the country who lack jurisdiction to find a mat for their victim or prospective suspects. This effort, however, was in vain. The teeth of this unidentified body were just unmatchable. Natalie Murray, a very accomplished forensic artist, was given the case in April 2016, and within a month, Natalie had successfully taken measurements, taken photos, and rebuilt the face of Spencer Island Doe using sketches and drawings. She based her reconstruction on facial morphology to provide a sense of how the victim must have appeared in real life. By securing rubber pegs to the skull in all the gaps, Natalie rebuilt the face. She then imagined what he may have looked like. His flat cheeks and small nose appeared typical of people with Asian ancestry. In order to imagine him at the moment of his disappearance, she sketched him from the shoulders of wearing the same red checkered shirt. The basic plan was to have someone recognize the face from the sketch, while Natalie worked on the sketches. The skeletal remains of Spencer Islando were examined by Dr. Kathy Taylor, a forensic anthropologist from Washington State, at the King County Medical Office. She determined that they may have belonged to a Caucasian adult male between the ages of 21 and 61, who stood between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall. The bones were not broken, but the leg's fractured femur had a po-healing outcome. In actuality, the largest bone in the human body is the femur. The man would have had continuous discomfort for some years, because an X-ray showed that the central part of his torso was protruding like the claw of an ice scraper. Detectives made the observation that they had never witnessed a fracture heal in such a manner, which prompted them to make the assumption that the individual may have chosen not to seek medical attention at all or had lived in a third-world nation with no access to medical care. Since there were no definitive solutions, Jane Jorgensen, an investigator at the medical examiner's office, was perplexed by the circumstance. It is improbable that the man would not have sought prompt medical attention, which is offered for free in many nations, even if he was homeless at the time of his death. It raises the question of why this man endured such agonizing anguish while remaining in silence. The individual also had 2 missing front teeth on his left side and 2 missing molars, both of which appeared to have been lost before he passed away, because the sockets had fully healed. Investigators were perplexed as to why the man had not received immediate assistance for his leg after discovering that he had a gap in one of his teeth and 3 teeth with alloy fillings, which suggested that the man had sought medical care at some point in the past. Regarding the circumstances surrounding the man's existence and eventual passing, the detectives felt confused and puzzled. Had he endured torturous treatment, officers noted that he might have been a prisoner as well because prisoners have access to dental care. But even if he had a limp and hypothetically had missing teeth, why wouldn't anyone recall this man? Due to the fracture, this person might have been 2 inches shorter on one side and would have had to walk with a limp. Did anyone not remember seeing a man limping around town? After much publicity, a former police officer from the 1970s reported to the police that he remembered seeing a man walk with a limp in the town in the late 1970s, but he couldn't remember his name. This provided access to medical records, but there was a significant age of ambiguity. He might have been a fisherman, and he might have either perished or been buried at sea by his companions. In September 2018, the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center received a portion of the victim's femur. It was then subjected to additional DNA extraction testing and uploaded to CODIS, a database used by the FBI to identify samples based on forensic genealogy. The institution was able to obtain mitochondrial DNA and SDR pictures in March of the following year. But because there were no matches, the results were inconclusive. The officers persisted nonetheless. They simply had to come up with alternative ways of identifying Spencer Island Doe. By 2018 and 2021, using a combination of circumstances, including short tandem repeat testing and dental records, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office investigators ruled out a number of missing people as probable matches. They did, however, begin a collaboration with Offermink in 2021 to develop a sophisticated DNA profile that may be utilized for investigative genetic genealogy to solve their and resolve cold cases. Through this collaboration, a number of unsolved cases have been successfully identified and solved. By January 2021, Offermink had received a portion of the femur for DNA extraction. DNAsolves.com provided funding for the entire endeavor, in the anticipation that the technology will one day lead to the identification of the Spencer Island John Doe. In other words, it made it much simpler to narrow down probable descendants when the search was reduced from 1,000 persons to 100. A DNA profile was successfully created in May 2021, and the collected DNA was sufficient for forensic-grade genome sequencing. Spencer Island Doe's race was finally verified as being Caucasian. Anyone trying to trace their own family history or locate long-lost relatives follows this same procedure. Investigating police constructed family trees from numerous stop matches and discovered a male who had gone missing in Everett, Washington in the late 1970s. Finally, the Spencer Island John Doe was identified. He went by the name Gary Lee Haney. The 29-year-old had vanished in the late 1970s, but either no one reported him missing or the records were mismanaged. In any case, the skeletal remains now had a name thanks to the DNA match with his half-sister. The chief medical examiner formally identified the descendant as Gary Lee Haney on February 10, 2023. The cold case was ultimately solved after 44 years. On September 23, 1950, Bernice Schaefer, Gary Lehaney's mother, gave birth to him. When Gary was still a little child, Bernice divorced his father and remarried in 1955 to an Air Force officer by the name of Sheldon Lehaney. Gary was adopted by his stepfather, who also legally altered his middle name. This young man and his parents were able to explore the globe. Gary was a fan of the Beatles and reportedly had excellent hand-eye coordination when playing the piano. Fame Gary's 71-year-old cousin assisted in putting together a variety of recollections and details regarding Gary's life. He maintained records for the large, dispersed family. A couple black and white pictures showed the dark-haired Gary clutching a large dog's leash. His mother is with him and wearing a stylish outfit, and his stepfather is dressed well. The images depict the boy's life, including a photo from his school. The family relocated to New York from Kansas. The Haneys were always away when the family would gather for a celebration every year. Thane has a faint recollection of Gary behaving slightly differently because of some sort of mental condition. The youngster actively hallucinated as an adult, which may have been caused by schizophrenia, but it also could have been autism. Gary's biological father, Joseph Candamati, passed away at the Missouri Veterans Hospital when Gary was 16 years old. 3 years later, his mother passed away. Gary Haney never got to meet his half-siblings neither. His stepfather likewise completed his military service and began working as a commercial pilot for Boeing when Gary's real parents passed away. From the early 1970s through at least 1990, Sheldon Lee Haney resided in the Everett, Washington area. Gary may have lived with his stepfathers, and he was the only living relative he had. Sheldon Haney occasionally had a wandering lifestyle after retiring. He liked traveling by road to Bayo, California in Mexico during the winter, although it's obvious that he had little responsibility. Perhaps the weather was too cold for the man. Is it possible Gary was an independent? Thane then recalled that his uncle had visited him in Texas somewhere in the middle of the 1980s. His nephew, Gary, was never brought up or addressed by him. According to certain documents, Gary was residing in a boarding home, and according to Social Security, he passed away on Christmas Eve in 1976. However, given that no living relatives listed him as dead, disputed this fact, investigators suggested that Sheldon and Gary may have quarreled or that he may have moved out on his own. In any event, Sheldon Haney couldn't locate his grown-up stepson. However, it should be emphasized that the paper record-keeping back then was not as comprehensive as it is now. Recent investigators who looked into the matter did not discover a missing person report. As a result, it's likely that the documents were misplaced before being converted to digital format. Sheldon Haney passed away in 1997 without knowing where his stepson was. Despite careful examination, after so many years, there was still no conclusive proof of foul play. Their research led detectives to the conclusion that Gary might have been carried away by the river current and eventually ended up where he was discovered. Or he might have drowned close to where he was discovered, with suspected explanations ranging from drowning to a head injury. Or a medical issue. The precise cause of death is still shrouded in mystery. Thane has no idea what his cousin looked like as an adult other than the pictures from their childhood. He planned to erect a monument or gravestone where Gary was discovered. It seems that after 44 years of detours and turns, the answers to this case have only raised new queries. What specific details surround Gary's passing? There was no known cause of death and no hint. The Spencer Island Doe at least have a name and some sort of resolution. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.